The weather turned mean the way a fist closes, quiet at first, then sudden and sure. Folks in Silver Creek had learned to read that kind of sky, but Grace Porter was already out past the last fence line, 3 miles or so from town, with the Brennan family's medicines tucked in her bag and a steady little mare under her. She had left at a good hour, sun still warm on her shoulders, the land soft with that October gold. Then thunder rolled over the ridge like a kettle drum, and the mare's heart went to jumping. One crack split the clouds. The horse rose, iron shoes scraping rock. Rain slipped slick through Grace's fingers. In the same breath, the trail fell away, and she with it, sliding through brush and shale, dress catching on dead limbs, rain slashing her face, until all the world became water and grit. She hit hard, the kind of blow that empties a body of air and sense. Her ankle folded under with a wet pop. For a long few beats, she only listened. To rain, to her own startled breaths, to the old hills saying nothing back. She called the mare's name, but the storm swallowed it. Hoofbeats faded. The lamp she always kept in her saddlebag had shattered on a rock, oil bleeding into the ground. Night crowded in early, the way it does when a front pushes fast. She dragged herself to a rock overhang, teeth clenched, dressed mud-cold, and heavy as sorrow. No one knew which trail she had chosen home. Not Mrs. Hartwell at the boarding house, not the Brennans, whose baby would sleep easier. With a fever broken, the land gives and it takes. That night, it took warmth first. She curled in on herself, shawl tight, and waited out a darkness that had no edges. Dawn came clean at the Dawson spread. Cole had been up before the roosters, a man who kept his time by work and weather. He was tightening a saddle when Henry clattered into the yard, face rain-burned, voice tight with worry. Grace Porter hadn't made it home. Her mare had wandered back to town alone, saddle torn. The sheriff meant to gather men when the ground wasn't so treacherous. "They're waiting on the weather, Henry said. Cole's hands went still on the cinch. Waiting had cost him once, cost him everything that mattered. He didn't use many words. He finished saddling his surest mount, packed what a man needs when he figures he might be out longer than good sense allows. Blankets, rope, bandages, meat and bread, a canteen, matches sealed against the wet, a knife and flint. Tom and the hands wanted to ride with him. He shook his head. Faster alone, he said, already mounting up. If he wasn't back in 3 days, tell the sheriff where he'd gone. He put his hat low against the wind and pointed his horse into the hills. Storm wash had ripped the country into seams, branches down, gullies running fat with brown water. Cole read land the way other men read scripture. He searched for sign the way a man prays. Quiet, steady, with his whole life behind every glance. He pictured Grace's route from the Brennan place and picked the likeliest trail, then another when the first broke off into shale. He didn't bargain with the Lord, but he sent up a plain word all the same. Let me be in time. Out under the rock shelf, Grace lifted her head into a pale morning. Pain made her slow and careful. She tested the ankle, swollen, angry, and knew she wasn't walking anywhere far. Water first. The creek below, the lip of the ravine, ran cold and quick from the storm. She crawled, gritting against the fire in her leg, drank in small handsful that hurt her teeth. Her father had been a field surgeon back when blood and courage tried to outpace death by lantern light. He had taught her simple things that keep a person in this world. Be found. She tore strips from her petticoat and tied them low on branches where a rider's eye might catch white against pine and stone. She searched her boot heel for the tiny dry cash he'd once tucked there to make her smile, and blessed the man, flint and steel wrapped in waxed paper. 30 strikes and a prayer later, she coaxed a stubborn, smoky flame into being. Then Gray climbed the air, and with it a stubborn will she hadn't known she still carried. Miles back, Cole found the mare in a spread of meadow that had drained quicker than other places. Clover, they called her in town. He spoke to the horse easy, took the torn saddle in his hands, and looked for what a man hopes not to see. No blood. His jaw set. He asked the ground what it knew, and followed the story it told. Fresh hoof gouges, a wild stop, then the raw lip of a washout. He slid down careful, his own mount ground tight above, and saw what he needed. A scrabble through brush where someone had fought to live. He found the broken lamp, found the ripped bag, followed a scuffed track toward water, then the first ribbon of white cloth tied where smart hands could reach. Pride moved through him like heat. She was hurt, yes, but she was working. He pushed on into country that keeps its own counsel. A tight little game trail snaked through windfall, then petered out in a slope of fresh rock where last night's rain had pulled a hillside down. The straightway was gone. Boulders shouldered together like cattle in a storm. He didn't waste time cursing. He turned back, picked a longer way, trusted his horse, and trusted the part of himself that had never quit on anything that breathed. The detour cost him miles he could feel in his bones, wind worked the smoke until it was a thread, then nothing. He swallowed that cold and rode harder. The ridge opened by afternoon, pines tipping their hats to a sky scrubbing itself blue. There, a shallow ring of stones, a careful little fire knocked down to coals, ashes still warm under the top layer. He swung down and studied sign like a man listening close at a sickbed. Drag marks, more white cloth. Dew still clung along an edge of fabric. This wasn't days old. He lifted his head and called, voice low but caring, the way trail men do when they want their sound to travel far and kind. Grace. Grace Porter. The hills gave him back his name in pieces. He called again, slower, each syllable steady as a heartbeat. The creek turned somewhere ahead behind cottonwoods. A flicker of movement teased at the corner of his sight. Wind combed the grass. The sound that reached him then might have been his own echo, or something softer, breath-shaped and human, riding back on water like a promise trying to find its way home. He set his jaw, gathered the reins, and went to meet it. He found her by the water, folded small against a willow shadow, hands scraped, hair wet and clinging. Her shawl was mud-stiff, and her boot lay crooked at an angle feet aren't meant to take. She had built herself a fire and kept it alive with stubborn care, ashes ring neat and smoke still climbing in a straight little prayer. When she heard his steps in grass, the old creek carried his name to her like a low bell. Cole, she said, surprised and sure at the same time, as if she had known all along he'd ride the dark down to find her. He went to a knee beside her, hat pushed back, eyes searching for what was broken and what still held. He didn't ask if she was hurt. He could see it plain. He only said quietly, "You did good, 'cause a person who's fought through the night needs to hear it out loud." Her mouth trembled into a rueful smile. "I left scraps like a fool hen," she whispered. "Well, I figured you might read 'em." I read 'em fine, he said, and I'll save me the arguing with God. He touched the boot, then her ankle, fingertips careful as a whisper. Heat fired under his palm. The joint was angry and swollen, and another heat, deeper, feathered his wrist. Fever, the kind that comes hard after rain chills a body and fear drinks up its strength. He slid off his coat and eased it around her, wool heavy and warm, pressing the collar close under her throat. The small, ordinary act steadied them both. Up close, he could see steadiness in her eyes that matched his. She had not given herself over to panic or wind. She had made a plan and lived through it. Pride moved across his face like a flicker of sun on water. There and gone. He set his shoulder under her arm and lifted slow. She leaned into him with a broken wince, jaw tight until breath returned. I can walk, she started. No, not today, he said gentle. You'll let me carry this part. He made a chair of his arms, and she settled with a soft gasp, fingers catching the fabric at his shoulder to keep from falling back into the dark. He rose smooth as any ranch hand that's handled stock and storm both. His horse stood patient as a deacon, head low, rein slack. Cole didn't try a mount with her in his arms. The ground was rough and slick from the blowout above. Instead, he moved steady beside the gelding, working the creek bank toward higher ground where a lion shack waited, one of those rough log shelters cowboys leave against weather and bad luck. They reached it at evening's turn. The old door croaked, and the cabin gave up its smell of dry timber, mouse dust, and past winters. Cole laid Grace on the bunk and set to work without hurry. Fire first. Coaxed from the coals, he carried in his mind as much as the matches in his bag. He fed the iron stove until it spoke with warm breath. Water next, fetched and boiled. He cut the boot cleanly rather than fight leather, then bound her ankle with a sure wrap. Strips pulled snug and neat. She watched him through lashes heavy with weariness. Her fever had taken hold. I can manage, she whispered once, voice thin as thread. I know you can, he answered, the words a balm rather than a challenge. But I came to help, and I mean to help. He warmed broth, salted light, and propped her to drink. She got down what she could. The rest he set aside close at hand. He wrung out a cloth in cool water, folded it, and laid it across her brow. The first touch made her flinch. The second drew a sigh from deep in her. Outside, the storm had gone off into the far country, leaving the hills washed and quiet. Inside, the little stove talked low and steady. Cole pulled a chair up to the bunk and took her hand without ceremony. The country he carried in his chest, loss, the kind no money answers, rose to the doorway like a wary animal and looked in. He did not invite it further. He just sat and breathed with her, counting out the slow measures the way a man keeps watch at a foaling stall through the worst part of night. Grace's eyes found his through fever haze. You were busy, she murmured, as if it might excuse him had he not come. I was late once, he said, and that was all the story he'd ever want to speak of it. Not tonight. She drifted, returned, drifted again. When she shivered, he added another blanket, then his coat, then his own warmth, drawn closer when the chill went mean. Every so often she said something that didn't belong to this day. A child's song line, her father's name, the way a lamp feels when it's freshly polished. He answered each stray thought as if it were the truest thing in the world. Yes, I hear you. It's all right. At midnight, the fever climbed. He could feel it in the air around her. a heat that burned without light. He changed the cloth, fresh and cool. He spoke in that rough, even tone the old hands use when a frightened colt thinks the world is ending. Easy now. Breathe. He told her where she was. Line shack on Dawson land. Warm fire. Stars punching through clouds outside. He told her what he saw when he first taught himself to ride out of grief. Fence posts silvered at dawn, meadow larks, calves shaking off sleep and standing on legs that looked too new for this world. Her panic faded back. She settled. He poured a measure of willow bark tea, bitter as truth, and she swallowed stubborn as a cowgirl from a storybook. Good, he said again, softer this time, because sometimes a word said twice is the hand that keeps a person from slipping away. When she slept for more than a few breaths, he let go of her hand long enough to mend the old lantern he'd found cracked among the stones near the creek. He cleaned the chimney with a square of muslin, fit the pieces careful until the shape of a lamp returned under his fingertips. The glass would always hold its scars, fine seams where the world had come apart and then been asked back into usefulness. He trimmed the wick, poured fresh oil, and set the lamp on the table by her head. It burned low and even, a small stubborn sun that refused to die. The hours pulled past. A coyote sang alone on the ridge and went quiet. The stove sighed. Cole's shoulders slumped, but he didn't sleep. When the fever bit again before dawn, fiercer than before, her hand tightened in his, nails pressing his skin hard enough to mark. He leaned close so she could find him in the blur. "I'm here," he said, voice like a warm coat. "I ain't going anywhere." Her breath hitched. The lamp flame trembled once, steadied. Somewhere far off, a night bird called, like a memory returning. And just then, when the dark seemed to gather itself for another try, Grace whispered a name that wasn't his, and the hurt on it cut through him like wire. The name she breathed wasn't his. It came thin, a thread pulled out of old cloth. He knew it before the sound finished leaving her mouth. Emma. It struck his chest, the way winter takes a gate, sudden, sure, and cold. He shut his eyes for half a beat, then opened them and eased his hand around hers, thumb settling where a pulse argued to keep going. "Hush now," he said low and even, as if he were talking to two souls at once, the woman on the bunk and the memory that had come to stand behind her. "You're safe. Rest." The dark tested them again. He met it without moving. A stillness a man earns the hard way. Somewhere after that, the fever broke, like a stubborn colt finally giving the bit. Sweat beaded her hairline, then ran, light and clean. She slept for a time that didn't count in minutes, but in relief. Cole changed the cloth, brought more water, set another stick in the stove, and listened to the quiet grow soft around them. The lamp he'd mended burned steady, its scarred glass turning the light warm as honey. Morning came in the color of ash, then peach, then gold. Grace blinked herself awake, one slow blink, then another. Her eyes cleared enough to find him in the chair, shoulders bowed, hat brim pulled low, but not hiding the night he'd sat through. "How long?" she asked, voice roughened. "Long enough," he said. "You gave that fever a good fight." She looked at the lamp first. The patched chimney and a small surprised smile touched her mouth. "You fixed it." "Best I could," he answered, "holds a flame." She followed his gaze to the window where dawn was easing itself across the hills. "I said a name," she murmured, almost afraid to know which. You did. He didn't make her say it again. She's part of my past. I reckon she'll walk a piece with me for the rest of my road. Grace watched him as if the right words were stitched to his coat, and she might read them there. I'm sorry. Me too, he said, and there was nothing in it that asked for pity. Just plain ground under both their boots. He fed her a little more broth, then a heel of bread he'd warmed on the stove lid until it turned soft and forgiving. Her color improved. The ankle remained mean and swollen, but the crisp, scary edge had dulled. She tested it and winced. Touchy, he warned. We'll keep weight off it best we can. How far to home? Farther than we like, he said. Closer than it was. He let a sliver of a grin show. There's a line shack between a person and trouble for a reason. We took ours. He said about making a travel out the way old-timers had taught him. 2 sturdy poles from spruce straight as truths, cross-lashed with rawhide cut off a spare riata, canvas stretched and tied. He added a pillow of rolled blanket for her back and lashed it to the gelding's rig so the pull would ride even. Grace watched, eyes tracking every knot, the cut of his knife, the practiced care. You've done this before, she said. More times than I meant to, he answered. Cattle, gear, a friend who broke a collarbone and spring roundup. Hills don't bargain. He tested the lashings, then lifted her gentle, as if she were made of something valuable and breakable. She was. Pain flashed her face and eased. She settled, hands finding the side ropes, dignity intact. Tell me when it's too rough, he said. We'll walk where we can, ride where we must, and stop before pride gets foolish. The day opened sweet and sharp. Last night's storm had rinsed the world, pinion and wet earth. The creek ran talking to itself, fat and fast, then calmer where willows leaned over like old women sharing news. Cole took a long, slow path that gave them more ground, but kinder angles. He marked sign of fresh slide and steered wide. He kept an ear on the wind for trouble and an eye on Grace. When she tired, he stopped without announcing it, handed her the canteen, and pretended he needed a drink worse than she did. They spoke little, and what words they used came soft. Your ranch, she asked once, always this quiet? Quieter than down, louder than a grave, he said, which was his humor and his truth both. Do you ever get used to the size of it? The open? You don't get used to it, he said after a spell. You make friends with it. It doesn't shout. It listens, huh? They ate at noon under a cottonwood. Jerked beef, a little cheese, a baked apple he'd packed without knowing why. She laughed when he pulled it out. A short surprise sound that did him more good than the food did her. You always carry apples to rescue missions. Only when I aim to succeed, he said. Mid-afternoon put them on a shelf of rock where the world fell away into a narrow valley. The main creek gathered itself there and ran quick, a paler green, shouldered by boulders slick as seals. The storm had swollen it, not a monster, but enough to ask care from 2 tired bodies. Cole studied the flow, the shin-deep flats, the slants where stones made seams. He'd brought men across worse in spring melt, but he'd rather not test luck with a woman on a travois in daylight slipping. We'll cross here, he decided. More steps, less fight. He cinched everything new tight, retied once for good measure, then eased the gelding down. Grace gripped the side rails and nodded, breath steady. The horse went careful, hooves tasting for purchase, shoulders working under the harness. Water climbed to fetlocks, then knees, then it fell back where the bed lifted. Cole took the downstream side, boots braced, rope in hand, steadying the pull so the travois wouldn't swing. Halfway, the current shouldered them with a sudden playful shove that wasn't playful at all. The gelding checked, just a hiccup in his rhythm, but the travois slewed a foot downstream. Cole planted hard, line biting his palm. Easy, he told the river, which never listens, and easy, he told the horse, which sometimes does. Grace didn't cry out. She watched the water, then him, and trusted. He felt it like a second rope, her trust, and leaned his weight until the world squared. The gelding stepped again. The travois straightened. The push of water became a hiss around fabric, and then a let go. They climbed the far bank with the care of old men, not heroes. Cole checked his knots again, though nothing had slipped. He checked Grace's face for strain, and saw something quiet behind it too. An ease that comes after a person looks at what could have gone wrong and finds herself still here. "Still with me?" he asked. "Still with you," she said, and the words rang closer than the distance between them. They made another mile, then two. Shadows laid themselves long. The smell of evening turned sweet with cut grass, somewhere far off in damp stone nearby. Cole measured light left and made the call. "We'll stop yonder," he said, pointing to a shelf tucked out of the wind. "Fire, rest, and we'll finish the ride by morning." He helped her down slow, set her up against a folded saddle, blanketed and sure. He lit the lamp he'd mended and hung it on a nail of a lightning-split snag, its glow pooling soft over both their faces. He cooked beans and poured coffee that tasted like a good promise. She ate until the color crept back into her lips. After, the quiet between them wasn't empty. It had shape. He worked at the cinch lazily, buying time he didn't name. She studied the small seams in the lamp glass, where his hands had asked broken things to hold. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a steadiness that matched the night. "If I hadn't tied those ribbons," she said, "would you have found me still?" "I would have kept riding," he said, "all the same." "That isn't what I asked." He lifted his eyes. "Yes," he said simply, "I'd have found you." A wind came skimming off the ridge and played with the lamp flame. It leaned, trembled, stood back up. Grace watched it, and he watched her watching it. Somewhere above them, the sky darkened in a way that promised stars. Somewhere below, water kept listing stones, as patient as forever, and out of that easy hush, the sound of a horse reached them, faint, then clearer, coming fast along the trail from town. Cole was on his feet before the sound fully shaped itself. He eased the lamp low, cupped the glass with one hand to keep it from flashing like a beacon, and listened the way men do when trouble sometimes dresses up like company. Hoofbeats counted the trail. Sure, not stumbling. One horse only. He stepped away from the glow and waited where their shadow held him. "Ho!" a voice called, pitch careful. "Rider from Dawson." Tom slid out of the dark with his hat tipped and a grin that showed more relief than teeth. "Boss," he said, soft so the night could keep its peace. "Heard you were headed this way. Sheriff's making a plan, but you know how plans go with weather." Cole let out a breath he hadn't owned. "You came alone?" "Faster," Tom answered, same way Cole had told him yesterday. He looked past Cole and tipped his hat to the shape of Grace propped against the saddle and blankets. "Ma'am," She smiled back, lamplight turning her face warm. Evening. Tom swung down and handed over a sack. Mrs. Hartwell stuffed this in my hands like I was riding to the governor. Clean linen, coffee, a jar of peach preserves. Says you saved her life last winter with your root teas. And what good's a town if we can't look after our own in return? He cleared his throat, suddenly shy. There's a short letter, too. She wanted you to know the Brennan baby's fever broke. Grace's eyes wet quick. She blinked them clear. Thank you, she said, and those 2 words held a town in them. They ate a little, 3 spoons passing 1 tin plate, and shared a cup of coffee that tasted like a mindful pause. Tom gave the trail news, the washout below the North Ridge, a slide above the old quarry, a stand of pines uprooted like bad teeth, and his brief, admiring assessment of the travois. She ride easy? He asked Grace. As anything can, when the ground keeps changing, she said, a spark of humor returning. We'll finish it at first light, Cole decided, not keen to take the last shelf in the dark with water still running in the wrong places. You keep? He asked Tom. Tom said his bedroll without ceremony, used to the way things were said and done out here. Few words, all meant. He settled on the far side of the lamp circle and let sleep catch him like it was a friend who owed him a debt. Cole stayed awake a while. Grace stayed awake because he did. They spoke in little pieces. He told her about a colt he gentled last spring, the way fear turns when it finds a hand it can trust. She told him one story from her father's war days, how a soldier will hold still for a stranger if the stranger looks him in the eye and says his name like it belongs to him. After a time, the lamp burned down to a pearl of light and the stove ticked slow. Tom snored once and quit. The stars put in their honest work. Dawn came with a gray lid that lifted slow. They ate, packed, and set out while the dye still had its cool on. Cole led. Tom took the tail, and the gelding pulled with a patient strength that made a man grateful for animals. They skirted the slide Tom had warned of, a smear of stone that would grind a horse to ruin if you asked him wrong, and reached the last shelf above the creek a little before mid-morning. The storm had spent itself. The water ran lower than yesterday. Quicker, singing in 100 voices, all telling the same story. Keep your feet planted and lean where the world leans back. This is the worst of it, Cole said, mostly to himself. He studied the angled descent. Shale marbles over hard pan. A path no wider than a hat brim in places, benching toward the water. He set the lines and checked each knot again, then cut a short length of rope and looped it through the travois cross brace to use as a drag. We'll go gentle, he said. They went gentle. 10 steps, a breath, 10 more. The horse felt him and had matched his temper. Grace watched the world slide upward at a calm pace. It might have worked that way all the way down if not for a patch of mud hiding under dust, a trick spot where the runoff had rolled across the shelf and gone mean. Cole's boot hit it, his foot shot. He caught himself on a rock with the hand that wasn't on the line, and the line gave an inch, then 2. The travois yawed toward the drop. The gelding broke stride to correct, found nothing to correct against, and blew a scared breath that fogged the morning. Cole, Grace said, not a cry but a cut-clean warning. She didn't wait for permission. She hauled herself up on an elbow, reached for the free rope he'd tied as a drag, and threw it like she'd been doing it her whole life. The loop kissed a broken stump in the shelf wall and bit. She yanked, bracing her good foot against the travoy rail, and the contraption checked just long enough for Cole to plant, lean, and find purchase that would hold a man. Tom was there a heartbeat later, shoulder under the back brace, teeth bared in what wasn't a smile. "Easy," Cole told the horse, and the river, and the part of his own fear that always speaks in his sister's voice. He breathed slow, counted, and the three of them, man, woman, hand, nudged life back onto the narrow, rightful track it had no business leaving. The next steps they took were the kind of careful that makes a person older and quieter without ever being noticed. At the bottom, on ground that sat true again, Cole turned to Grace. She still had the rope in her hands. Her knuckles were bloodless around it, and her breath came quick, but her face held the kind of calm a person wins, not inherits. "You saved our skins," Tom said, hat in his hands, respect plain as sunrise. Grace's mouth tilted. "Seemed a pity to let a good lamp and two stubborn men get washed away," she said, and now they did smile. Cole stepped closer, not so close as to crowd, but near enough that his voice didn't have to travel far. "You throw a line like you meant to be out here," he said. "I meant to be alive," she answered softly. "Out here just happened to be where life was." They took the flats after that, grass bending like a field of prayer. A meadowlark ran ahead of them for 100 yards, scolding and proud. By early afternoon, the country began to look familiar, even to Grace's fogged memory. An outcrop like a broken tooth, a windmill turning slow against the sky cleaned of everything ugly, the far shine of town windows catching light. The gelding lifted his head and nickered toward home. Tom whooped once and hushed himself, embarrassed at the joy. They topped a low rise, and there it was. Silver Creek, laid out like something a careful hand had carved. Church steeple, a stovepipe line of smoke from the blacksmith, the white square of Mrs. Hartwell's boarding house, like a handkerchief, dropped in the street. Sound came light, the small noises of a place making do. Hammer, dog, some child with a laugh like 10 bells. Cole stopped them on that rise and let the sight have its due. "Almost there," he said. Grace looked and didn't speak for a while. The town wasn't rich or grand. It was plain and faithful. A person could anchor there if she learned how. Her eyes moved to the edges where the open land began again, then back to the single road that carried everything in and out. "I didn't know," she said, voice low, "how much I wanted the ordinary." "The ordinary's a miracle," Tom said, surprising himself. "Most folks don't spot it till it's gone." They started down. A few heads turned their way, then more. By the time they rolled into the edge of town, the front porches had people on them, and the street held a small hush that wasn't fear or gossip, so much as the sound a community makes when it takes a deep, grateful breath all together. The sheriff stood with his thumbs in his belt. Mrs. Hartwell came out, wiping her hands on her apron, then forgot the apron and lifted both arms like she might catch Grace herself if the travois jumped. Cole felt something settle in his chest that had been restless for years. He didn't name it. He only glanced at Grace to see if she felt it too. The lamp swung from the travois post, steady in the afternoon light, its seams shining like fine silver lines. They were 10 yards from the boarding house door when a horse cut across the street hard, throwing sparks from its shoes, and a rider hauled back on the reins with a face full of hurry. "Cole," the man shouted. You'd best come. There's talk at the Dawson fence line. Men there who don't belong, and they look to mean business." The town's breath caught again, but this time it wasn't a grateful sound. The shout broke the spell of homecoming. Cole's eyes flicked to Grace. She tightened her hold on the side rope, the way a person grips a thought she refuses to lose. The sheriff stepped forward, measuring the dust and the trouble in it. "How many?" he asked the rider. "3, maybe 4, the man answered, breathing hard. "North fence, cut wire, fresh prints. Look like men who aim to take what ain't theirs." Cole's voice came steady. "Tom, see Grace to the boarding house. Sheriff will ride." Grace's fingers found his sleeve. "It's your land," she said low, "but don't let it cost you what you just got back." He tipped his hat, a promise tucked under the brim. "It won't." Tom loosened the Travoy rig and lifted Grace with the same care Cole used, his big hands gentle as a nurse. Mrs. Hartwell met them halfway, all apron, tears, and orders. "Inside with you, lamb. Broth is hot, a bed is warm, and no one argues with me in my own doorway." She shooed like a general and spared Cole a look that could hold a storm at bay. "Bring yourself back in one piece," she said. "I aim to," he answered and swung into the saddle. They rode out with a small string. Sheriff, 2 hands. The rider who'd brought the news, moving quick along the north road. The town fell behind. The open took over. Cole felt the old habits come on like a coat he hadn't worn since winter. The counting of shadows, the measuring of wind, the way the land shares secrets if you move quiet and don't brag about it. They cut east at the cottonwoods, took the cattle trail just below the ridge, and came on the fence line where the ground gave up the story plain. Wire sagged in a sharp V, posts nicked, a boot heel that dragged like its owner carried worry or whiskey in his knees. He held up a hand, and the men fanned without noise. He took the middle. The sheriff dropped off to his right, Tom to his left, and they walked their horses toward the cut in the wire. Beyond it, in a pocket of scrub, 3 men bent over a coil, and a 4th kept a watch that wasn't worthy of the word. Their horses stamped behind a screen of rabbit brush, tacked cheap and wrong for distance. Drifters or small-time thieves, not the kind of crew that lays awake thinking about law, the kind that lays awake thinking about luck. Cole didn't draw. He didn't need to. He let his voice carry first. "Mornin'," he said, courteous as church. "That wire you got your hand on belongs to Dawson land. The grass it guards does too. Put it down." The men jerked, hands going where hands go when they figure a gun might decide the next 5 minutes. The sheriff showed himself easy, thumbs hooked. "No one's hungry for a grave," he said, "not over fence wire." The oldest of the 4 had a face like a baked riverbed and the eyes of somebody who'd been told no by the world too many times. He measured the odds and made a choice that didn't improve them. "We ain't taking cattle," he said, chin high. "Just a length of wire. There's a ranch 30 miles east that'll pay clean for it. There's a store 2 miles south of that ranch that'll sell it for less than your life," Cole said, "which is what you're pricing right now." No one moved. The prairie wind rubbed grass heads together till they hissed. A hawk sliced a bright corner of sky and went on about its business. Cole kept his hands where a man could see them, his voice as calm as a kitchen table. "You've got a road going north and a road going south," he said. "You pick one, and you pick it now. Leave the wire, leave the posts, Take your horses and take your foolishness with you." The youngest shifted, anger and shame wrestling across his cheeks like two dogs that couldn't decide which way to bite. The oldest cut him a look, the kind of look that says, "I've carried the weight of you long enough," and dropped the coil. It hit the dirt with a hollow sound that might have been relief. He raised open hands. "We'll go," he said. "We ain't looking for gunplay." "Good," the sheriff answered. "Then you won't find any." They backed out wrong-footed, mounted wrong smooth, and clattered off toward a piece of country that might treat them kinder if they let it. Cole and Tom cut the wire ends clean, spliced it proper, stretched it true, and set the staples like a heart setting its rhythm right again. When the last staple bit wood, Cole felt that same inner settling he'd borrowed for a moment, and town returned and sit a spell. The sheriff blew out a breath. "Could have gone bad." "Didn't," Cole said. "Sometimes a man needs a better option named out loud." They turned home. The ride back felt shorter, the way return journeys do. Town rose up simple and sure. Folks who'd stood in their doorways stepped aside so the horses could come straight through. Cole swung down in front of the boarding house, and the world narrowed to one door, and the woman sitting inside it with her ankle propped, hair braided back neat by Mrs. Hartwell's busy hands. The mended lamp sat on the windowsill, picking up afternoon light, seams shining like someone had laid fine rivers of silver along its wounds. Grace studied Cole's face as if storm signs might write themselves there. "All right?" she asked. "All right," he said, and some of the lines around his mouth eased. Mrs. Hartwell made a satisfied cluck and retreated to her kitchen, though she left the parlor door conveniently ajar. Tom found himself suddenly interested in shoeing estimates at the livery, a man who knew when a page ought to turn without him in it. Cole took the chair beside Grace, the way he had beside that shack bunk, and for a moment neither of them pretended they were anywhere but exactly where they belonged. The air smelled of soap and coffee. Street noise fell to a hush that wasn't empty. "You told me not to let it cost me," he said finally. "I minded you." She smiled and tapped the lamp with a knuckle. "You mend things that matter," she said, "on fences, glass, a person's courage when it slips." He rested his forearms on his knees and looked at his hands like he'd just been introduced to them. "I've held on too tight to what I couldn't get back," he said. "Spent years riding against a clock no one else could hear." She watched him without hurrying him. The quiet between them didn't crowd. It waited. "Tonight," he said in the words plain as trail talk, "I'm asking something not of the land, not of time. I'm asking you. Stay. Not because you owe me breath or gratitude, because this feels like the kind of ordinary a man only gets if he's brave enough to call it home." Her answer didn't come quick. It came true. "I'll heal slow," she said. "I can be stubborn. I will want to run when I'm scared. But I'm tired of living, arranged for leaving." He lifted his eyes. She held them. "So?" She nodded once. Then again, the second time, with that small, sure smile he'd carried as a hope across wet miles and cut stone. "I'll stay," she said, "if you will." "I already did," he answered, and the room let go of a breath it hadn't known it was holding. Evening drew itself soft outside. Somewhere down the street, a fiddle started up a tune that had traveled west in a pocket and decided to live here. The town settled. The lamp on the sill burned without smoke. Its seams, born of breaking, caught the last of the daylight and threw it back gentle, like proof that some things, once mended right, don't pretend to be what they were. They become what they were meant for. Together, they watched the light lean toward night. The old hills held their peace. The wind walked past like a friend heading home. And the story, which had begun with a hard fall and a harder sky, rested in the ordinary miracle of two people choosing the same place at the same time.